There comes a point in every woman's life when the reflection in the mirror feels heavy, not just from age or exhaustion, but from the weight of choices, regrets, and the quiet ache of distance from God. Sin does that. It promises freedom but leaves chains. It whispers satisfaction but delivers emptiness. Many women carry this silent burden, convincing themselves that they've gone too far, messed up too deeply, or drifted too long to ever find their way back. But the beauty of grace is that God doesn't wait for us at the finish line of perfection. He meets us in the mess. He finds us in the shadows of our brokenness and whispers, "You are still mine." The moment of awakening often doesn't come in a cathedral or a choir-filled sanctuary. It comes in the quiet night when tears soak the pillow, or in the middle of ordinary tasks when the soul suddenly hungers for something more. That longing is not weakness. It is the first spark of God's mercy calling you home. The journey back is not instant and it is not easy. It requires surrender, the courage to drop the walls we've built, to lay down the shame we've carried, and to open our hands to receive what we don't deserve, forgiveness. That surrender is not humiliation, it is liberation. Because the truth is, sin's greatest weapon is shame, and shame thrives in silence. The moment we turn toward God, shame loses its grip and grace begins to rewrite our story. Redemption is not just God erasing the past, it is Him transforming it. The very wounds that once defined you become the testimony of His power. The woman who once walked in fear now stands in courage. The one who felt unworthy now carries dignity. The heart that was shattered is made whole, not by pretending the cracks never existed, but by allowing God's love to shine through them. And so, salvation is not just a destination, it is a new way of walking. It is choosing each day to live in the light, to speak with compassion, to act with faith, to extend to others the same mercy you received. A woman who has tasted God's grace no longer lives as a prisoner of her past. She becomes a beacon for others still lost in the dark. From sin to salvation, the path is not straight, not without struggle, but it is worth every step. Because the end of this journey is not just forgiveness, it is freedom. Not just survival, it is purpose. And not just restoration, it is the unshakable truth that no matter how far you've wandered, the God's love is always closer than you think. The reality of brokenness is something that every human being eventually encounters, though each experience is deeply personal. For a woman walking the path from sin to salvation, it often begins with an uneasy recognition that life is not as it was meant to be. Brokenness reveals itself in layers. Sometimes it is visible through mistakes that leave scars. Other times it is hidden beneath the quiet weight of guilt, shame, and disappointment. Sin has a way of promising fulfillment yet leaving emptiness, and in that emptiness, brokenness takes root. It can feel like the soul has been cracked, the heart shattered into pieces that no amount of human effort can restore. Yet acknowledging this condition is the very first step toward healing, because what remains unacknowledged remains unhealed. For many women, brokenness comes with the experience of believing lies that have been spoken over their lives. Lies that they are not enough, that they are unworthy, that they are beyond redemption. These lies often become internalized truths, shaping how they see themselves and how they relate to others. Brokenness can manifest as a restless striving for approval, a deep sense of inadequacy, or a desperate attempt to fill the void with temporary fixes. Whether it is relationships that disappoint, choices that backfire, or addictions that consume, the reality of brokenness is that it impacts the whole being, body, mind, and spirit. It does not politely stay confined to one area of life, but seeps into everything. What makes brokenness even more difficult is the silence it breeds. Shame convinces women to hide their struggles, to put on a mask of strength, to carry the burden alone. Outwardly, everything may look fine, yet inwardly the soul is fractured. This silent suffering becomes a prison, convincing them that no one could understand and that God is far away. Yet the truth is that brokenness, as painful as it is, becomes a mirror reflecting the desperate need for grace. It exposes the insufficiency of self-reliance and reveals that healing cannot be manufactured through willpower or perfectionism. Brokenness strips away illusions of control and points toward the only one who can truly restore. There is also a paradox within brokenness. While it brings deep pain, it also creates the soil for transformation. A broken heart becomes more open to receive love, a weary soul more willing to surrender. In the cracks of our lives, light can enter. In the shattered places, God begins His work of renewal. The reality of brokenness, then, is not just a story of despair, it is also a testimony of potential redemption. A woman who has faced her brokenness honestly is not weaker but stronger because she no longer clings to illusions but to truth. However, embracing this reality requires honesty and vulnerability. It means acknowledging sin without excuses, admitting wounds without denial, and facing failures without deflection. Vulnerability feels risky because it opens the door to judgment and rejection, but it is also the doorway to freedom. Pretending to be whole when one is broken only deepens the fracture, yet when brokenness is laid bare before God, it becomes the starting point of a new identity, not defined by mistakes but by grace. Every story of salvation begins with the recognition of brokenness. The woman who comes to God is not the one who has managed to fix her life perfectly, but the one who has realized she cannot fix it on her own. It is in this moment of surrender that true transformation begins. Brokenness teaches dependence, it cultivates humility, and it dismantles pride. It creates an openness to receive what only God can give. The broken places that once seemed like evidence of failure become the very places where redemption takes root. The reality of brokenness is not meant to destroy, it is meant to awaken. It is the painful but necessary reminder that we were not created to walk apart from God. It strips away the false securities we cling to and invites us to return to the source of life. It teaches us that strength is not found in never falling, but in rising again by the hand of mercy. And though the process is often messy and slow, it is through brokenness that the most profound beauty emerges. A woman who has walked through the valley of sin and faced the weight of her brokenness becomes a living testimony that no darkness is too deep for God's light to reach, no mistake too heavy for His forgiveness, and no wound too raw for His love to heal. The moment of awakening is rarely loud or dramatic, it often comes quietly, like a whisper that interrupts the noise of everyday life. For a woman walking through the shadows of sin and brokenness, awakening is the sudden clarity that something must change, that life cannot continue in the same direction. It might come in a moment of deep loneliness when the silence becomes unbearable, or in the middle of a crowded room where the emptiness inside feels louder than any laughter around. It is the spark of realization that the path she has chosen is leading her farther away from peace, farther away from joy, and farther away from God. This awareness is both painful and liberating. Painful because it exposes the reality of how far she has wandered, liberating because it opens the door to the possibility of return. Awakening does not always arrive in one grand revelation. Sometimes it is the accumulation of small nudges. A conversation overheard, a verse remembered from childhood, the kindness of a stranger, or the wariness that finally breaks through denial. All these can serve as gentle invitations from God. They are not coincidences. They are reminders that He has never stopped pursuing her. The moment of awakening is the recognition of these signals, the sudden awareness that life without Him is hollow. It is the dawning truth that the very things she thought would bring happiness have only left her soul hungrier. This hunger cannot be satisfied with distractions or temporary pleasures. It demands something eternal. Often, awakening happens at the lowest point, when pride has been stripped away and nothing remains but the ache of longing. In this place of emptiness, the heart becomes open enough to hear the whisper of God calling it home. The moment she realizes that her worth is not measured by her failures, that her identity is not defined by her past, she begins to see herself through a new lens. This shift in perspective is powerful because it dismantles the lies that have held her captive. The chains of shame begin to loosen when the truth of God's love breaks through. Awakening, then, is not simply awareness of sin, it is recognition of grace. There is a sacred vulnerability in this moment. It feels raw and uncomfortable, as though standing in front of a mirror with every flaw exposed. Yet it is precisely in this vulnerability that hope begins to grow. A woman may resist at first, convincing herself that she can still manage things on her own, but the awakening persists. It lingers in her thoughts, whispers in her conscience, and stirs in her soul until she can no longer ignore it. The very presence of this awakening is evidence that God's Spirit is at work, gently urging her toward repentance and renewal. For some, awakening comes through consequences, the loss of a relationship, the collapse of a dream, or the pain of choices that can no longer be hidden. For others, it comes through blessings, a child's innocent question, a friend's encouragement, or a moment of stillness where God's voice is felt. However it arrives, it is always an invitation to stop running, to stop hiding, and to stop pretending that everything is fine. It is an invitation to step into truth, no matter how uncomfortable, and to discover that truth does not condemn but sets free. What makes the moment of awakening so powerful is that it carries both honesty and hope. Honesty in confronting what is broken, hope in believing that brokenness does not have to be the end of the story. This balance allows a woman to face her past without being defined by it. She begins to realize that God is not waiting to punish her, but to restore her. The awakening brings light to the dark corners of her life, revealing not only what must change, but also what can be redeemed. The moment of awakening is the intersection between despair and possibility. It is where tears of regret meet the first breath of courage. It is where the heart whispers, "There must be more." And the soul begins to believe, "There is." This shift is not just intellectual, but deeply spiritual. It is the awareness that God's presence has never truly left, that even in her wandering, He has been near. The awakening is not a final step, but a beginning, a doorway that leads to surrender, redemption, and transformation. The journey of surrender is one of the most difficult yet transformative steps in moving from sin to salvation. It is the moment when a woman stops wrestling with her own strength and admits that she cannot carry the weight of her burdens alone. Surrender does not come naturally because pride resists it, shame fears it, and the human desire for control clings tightly to the illusion of independence. But surrender is not about defeat in the sense the world defines it. It is about releasing what was never meant to be carried alone. It is the recognition that holding on to pain, guilt, or control only prolongs the suffering, while letting go creates space for God's grace to flow in. For many women, surrender begins with exhaustion. After years of trying to piece together a broken life, after countless attempts to cover wounds with temporary solutions, there comes a moment when strength runs out. This exhaustion is not weakness. It is an invitation. When the soul reaches its limit, it is most ready to yield. In that quiet, wary place, surrender whispers, "You don't have to do this alone anymore." The act of surrendering requires courage because it feels like stepping into the unknown. Yet the unknown of God's grace is safer than the familiar chains of self-reliance. Surrender also demands honesty. It means admitting where life has gone wrong, acknowledging the choices that led to pain, and confessing the fears that keep the heart bound. Many resist this honesty because it feels like exposure, as though their failures will define them forever. But surrender transforms honesty into healing. When a woman dares to bring her brokenness before God, she discovers that His response is not rejection but embrace. His mercy does not shame her for her sins, it washes them away. This realization is both humbling and freeing, for it reveals that she does not need to earn His love, she only needs to receive it. The journey of surrender is rarely a one-time event. It unfolds day by day, sometimes moment by moment. Each time fear rises, surrender means choosing trust. Each time shame whispers, surrender means choosing grace. Each time the past threatens to dictate the present, surrender means choosing faith in God's promises over the weight of memory. This repeated act of release gradually builds a new rhythm of living, one where dependence on God replaces the constant struggle to manage everything alone. The woman who once carried her wounds in silence begins to carry them to God in prayer, and slowly her spirit learns the language of peace. There is also a paradox in surrender. What feels like losing control actually leads to gaining freedom. By letting go of what she cannot change, a woman discovers that God can change what she never thought possible. By releasing her need to be perfect, she finds the beauty of being loved unconditionally. By surrendering her deepest wounds, she experiences the power of redemption, turning pain into testimony. This paradox reveals that true strength is not found in holding on, but in letting go. Surrender is not passive. It is an active choice to trust. It takes more bravery to hand everything over to God than to keep pretending to be in control. It takes courage to lay down weapons of self-defense and allow Him to fight battles on her behalf. This courage grows stronger each time she sees the evidence of His faithfulness. Each time He carries her through storms she could not endure alone. The more she surrenders, the more she learns that her life is safest not in her own hands, but in His. The journey of surrender also reshapes identity. A woman who once defined herself by her mistakes begins to see herself as beloved. The chains of unworthiness begin to break as she realizes she is accepted, forgiven, and redeemed. This identity shift does not erase the past, but reframes it. The failures that once felt like final chapters now become footnotes in a larger story of grace. Surrender teaches her that she is not defined by what she has done, but by what God has done for her. In the end, the journey of surrender becomes the gateway to transformation. It is the bridge that connects brokenness to healing, despair to hope, and sin to salvation. It is not the end of struggle, but it is the beginning of freedom. Surrender teaches that the path forward is not paved by perfection, but by trust. And in that trust, a woman learns to rest, to heal, and to live fully in the light of God's love. The power of redemption is one of the most extraordinary truths of the human experience, because it reveals that no mistake is final and no life is beyond restoration. For a woman who has carried the weight of sin, shame, or regret, redemption is the assurance that God can take what was broken and make it whole again. Redemption does not deny the past, nor does it erase the scars, but it transforms them into symbols of grace. It is the miracle of God rewriting a story that once seemed destined for despair and turning it into a testimony of hope. The power of redemption is not only about forgiveness, but about renewal. The process of becoming someone new, someone free, someone alive in ways she never thought possible. Redemption begins with the recognition that grace is greater than guilt. Many women remain trapped in cycles of regret because they believe that what they have done defines who they are. They replay mistakes over and over, convinced that they cannot outrun the shadows of their past. But redemption steps in and breaks that cycle by declaring that a person's worth is not tied to their failures. It declares that identity is rooted in love, not in error. The moment a woman accepts this truth, chains begin to fall, and the prison doors of shame swing open. The power of redemption lies in this freedom, the ability to walk forward without being bound by yesterday. Redemption also has the power to restore dignity. Sin often strips away self-worth, leaving behind feelings of inadequacy and unworthiness. But redemption lifts a woman's head, reminding her that she is not defined by what she lost, but by the one who found her. This restoration is not shallow, it goes deep, healing wounds that were hidden for years. It speaks to the parts of her heart that felt unlovable and whispers the truth that she has always been loved. The woman who once hid in the shadows begins to walk boldly in the light, not because she is perfect, but because she has been redeemed. The beauty of redemption is that it does not stop at forgiveness. It repurposes the very pain that once caused despair. The struggles and failures that once brought shame now become the testimony of God's power. A woman who has been redeemed can use her story to encourage others still trapped in darkness. Her scars become a roadmap for someone else's healing. The mistakes that once silenced her now give her a voice of compassion and empathy. In this way, redemption multiplies. It does not just restore one life, but radiates outward, touching many. Redemption also reshapes perspective. Where there was once bitterness, there is now gratitude. Where there was once fear, there is now courage. Where there was once hopelessness, there is now faith. The redeemed woman sees life differently because she has experienced the depth of God's love. She no longer views her past as a burden, but as proof of grace. Each memory of failure becomes a reminder of the mercy that carried her through. This perspective gives her strength to face new challenges with confidence, knowing that the same God who redeemed her yesterday will sustain her today and tomorrow. The power of redemption also lies in its permanence. Human forgiveness can sometimes feel fragile, dependent on moods or conditions, but God's redemption is steadfast. Once He redeems, He does not revoke His grace. A woman can walk in assurance, knowing that her salvation is secure, her identity is unshakable, and her future is full of hope. This permanence brings peace because she no longer has to live in fear of rejection. She can rest in the truth that she belongs to God, and nothing can separate her from His love. There is a unique joy that comes with living in redemption. It is not the shallow happiness that fades with circumstances, but a deep, abiding joy that comes from knowing she has been set free. This joy is resilient. It remains even in hardship because it is rooted in something unshakable. The redeemed woman can face trials with strength, not because life is suddenly easy, but because she knows she is never alone. She carries within her the unshakable truth that her life is valuable, purposeful, and loved beyond measure. Ultimately, the power of redemption is not about erasing the past, but about transforming it. It takes what was once broken and makes it beautiful. It takes what was once hopeless and fills it with possibility. It takes the woman who once felt lost and gives her direction, meaning, and strength. Redemption is not just a concept to be believed, but a reality to be lived, and when a woman embraces it fully, her life becomes a reflection of grace. Walking in new light is the natural outcome of a life touched by redemption. It is the evidence that something deep has shifted inside, that the chains of the past no longer dictate the direction of the future. For a woman who has walked through brokenness, awakening, surrender, and redemption, stepping into new light means living each day as someone transformed. It does not mean that struggles disappear or that life suddenly becomes easy, but it does mean that her perspective, her strength, and her purpose are now rooted in something eternal. The light she walks in is not of her own making. It is the radiance of God's love shining through her, illuminating paths she once stumbled through in darkness. To walk in new light is to embrace freedom. This freedom is not reckless, it is purposeful. It is the freedom of no longer being bound by shame, fear, or regret. A redeemed woman can look at her past without being imprisoned by it, because she now sees it as a testimony rather than a sentence. She can look at her present with courage, because she knows she does not walk alone, and she can look at her future with hope, because she trusts the one who guides her steps. This freedom is not fragile, it is secure in the promises of God. It allows her to live boldly, to love deeply, and to forgive freely, because she has experienced firsthand the depth of mercy. Walking in new light also means living with clarity. Darkness once clouded her vision, distorting her worth and convincing her that she was beyond redemption. But light brings truth, and truth brings clarity. She now understands that her value is not measured by the world's standards, but by God's design. She sees relationships differently, no longer seeking validation from others to fill her emptiness, but extending love from a heart already made whole. She views challenges differently, no longer as insurmountable obstacles, but as opportunities to trust deeper. This clarity shifts the way she moves through life. It anchors her in wisdom and keeps her grounded in faith. A new light also brings responsibility, because transformation is not meant to be hidden. A woman walking in light naturally becomes a reflection of that light to others. She does not need to preach with grand words. Her very life becomes the message. The kindness in her actions, the gentleness in her voice, the resilience in her spirit, all of these speak louder than anything she could say. People begin to notice that she carries something different, something steady, something radiant. This is the quiet power of walking in new light. It draws others toward the source of that light without her needing to force it. There is also a new strength that comes from walking in light. Darkness often weakens the soul, convincing it to hide, to shrink, to doubt. But light empowers. It gives the courage to step into roles once avoided, to speak truth once silenced, to pursue dreams once abandoned. It builds resilience to face trials without collapsing under their weight. The strength of light is not about never stumbling, but about rising each time with faith that God's hand is steady. This strength allows her to endure storms with peace and to celebrate victories with humility. Walking in light changes how she sees others as well. No longer blinded by judgment or bitterness, she begins to see people through the lens of compassion. She understands brokenness because she has lived it. She understands grace because she has received it. And so she extends mercy generously, offering forgiveness where it is undeserved and encouragement where it is unexpected. Her relationships become healthier, rooted not in neediness or fear, but in genuine love. In this way, walking in new light not only transforms her own life, but also transforms the lives of those around her. This new way of living also opens doors to purpose. Once trapped in cycles of regret and confusion, she now has direction. The light of God does not simply illuminate her past, it lights the path ahead. She discovers that her story has meaning beyond herself, that her scars have the power to heal others, that her journey carries wisdom to guide those still lost. Purpose flows naturally when she walks in light, because she no longer lives for herself, but as a vessel of something greater. Every act of kindness, every word of truth, every step of faith becomes part of a larger mission to spread the same light she has received. The beauty of walking in new light is that it is not temporary but continuous. Each day brings new opportunities to grow, to serve, and to reflect God's glory. There will still be challenges, but light ensures that she never faces them blind. There may still be moments of doubt, but light reminds her that she is never alone. The journey ahead is no longer defined by fear of failure, but by confidence in grace. The walking in new light means stepping forward with steady assurance that even when shadows fall, the light within and around her will never fade. Every step from brokenness to awakening, from surrender to redemption, and finally into the light, is proof that no story is too far gone for God to rewrite. A woman who once carried the weight of sin now walks in freedom, not because she was strong enough to save herself, but because grace met her where she was and lifted her higher than she imagined possible. Her life becomes a living testimony that darkness does not have the final word, shame does not hold the final verdict, and failure does not write the final chapter. The final word belongs to love, the final verdict belongs to mercy, and the final chapter is redemption. Walking in new light means embracing this truth every day, choosing faith over fear, hope over despair, and grace over guilt. And in doing so, her journey becomes more than her own. It becomes a beacon for others still searching for the path back to God.